In this video, we'll be looking at the SonoBat Viewer. As the name suggests, the viewer is the part of the program that we use to display, listen to, and take measurements of our bat recordings. In the video, we will be using the standalone viewer, which is available to download from the SonoBat websites free of charge. The free viewer has slightly reduced functionality compared with the viewer that is available with SonoBat UK and SonoBat Universal, but these differences will be explained. The first thing we need to do then is to open the SonoBat Viewer. So we've now opened the viewer, and the first job we have is to import some recordings into the software. So we can do that in one of two ways. We can either use this button at the top, the open file button, and if we just click that, first thing you'll see is that as part of the free viewer software, we've included some example calls from bats from the UK. So just simply by clicking on one of these calls, it will open in the viewer. But what I want to show you is how you open your own files recorded with your own detector. And for that, first of all, we have to use this button here, the Change Directory button. If we click that, you'll see it opens a standard file explorer, and we can navigate to wherever our file or folder of files is kept. But if I just close this down, the second method we can do is to drag and drop either a file or a folder into the software. Now for this demonstration, I've just made some recordings in the garden, and I've placed them here in a file on the desktop. So it's just quite easy then just to take this file, or folder rather, and just drop it into the software. And we can do it in a number of places. Top right hand corner, you'll see there's a button saying file drop. We could drop there. On the left hand side, similar, file drop, or we can use this small window at the top in the center of the screen. So that's the folder now dropped into the software, and it gives us a list of the individual files that are in that folder. So if I just click on the top one, as you can see, it opens up in the viewer. The next thing I want to look at is how to navigate through that folder of calls. And you'll see here there are two buttons, an up and a down, but at the moment the up button is greyed out, and that's because this was the first file in the folder. If I then click on the down button, moves to the next file in the folder, and as you can see, the up arrow, the up button is now green and is available for use. Now, although you won't be able to see it, I can do exactly the same thing by using the up and down arrow keys on the keyboard. So if I just click down, move to the next file, or I can go back up again. And this is back now at the first file in the folder. The next button along is the classify and the show button. Now these are not available on the free viewer software. This is a function that's available on the full UK version, but if you click this button, it does actually kind of show you what happens. So when we hit the classify button, the first thing you'll see are these yellow lines that have been overlaid over the individual calls, and these are what are known as trend lines, and these trend lines are the lines along which SonoBat makes all its automatic measurements. On the UK version, the sequence classification will be shown in the top in this part of the window here. If we now go to the show button, under each one of these calls, individual calls, it will actually give a classification for that individual call. Now in this case, because the classifiers are not actually built into this free viewer, it just says species, but it's just to give you an idea what the actual full version of SonoBat looks like. But first of all, we'll close this down, get back to our original screen. The next button here is a left and right button. It just toggles between left channel and right channel. Now, to be honest, these days, not that important. This is more a hang up from the old days, when we used to be recording on things like Peterson D240X's and recording onto either a mini disc or an MP3 recorder. And they were recording a stereo signal of which the back call was either on the right or the left channel, and that's what you would use to specify which one of the two channels on a stereo recording you would look at. But I say most back detectors these days produce a mono signal, so it's not that crucial. The next box along here, the green writing on the top here, is some information that is actually derived from the detector itself, and this is embedded in the metadata of the folder, metadata of the file. And as you can see, in this case, it says the sampling frequency was 384 kilohertz, and we've got TE1, so time expanded 1. Obviously then this means this is a real-time recording. Again, if we were using one of the old 240X's, 10 times time expansion, it would have TE 10 times in that box there. The box below is the actual file name. Now I don't want to go into too much detail on this because if you want to see more on this and how you can use file names and put prefixes and suffixes onto the name to help you find your files a lot easier, if you watch the training video on the data wizard, that'll give you a lot more information. But just to show you on the free viewer software how you amend your file name, if we just click at the start of the date time group, and then we can type in, say, a location. So in my case, I was making my recordings here in my home village, which is in Charlwood. So I can just type in a location there at the start, and then we use this button here, this change button, to save our changes. So there we go, that's a new file name then with the location included. I'm just going to jump down now to this box at the bottom, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it was extensively covered in the data wizard video, but this is the box that contains our field notes that we can append to our recordings. And although the data wizard isn't included with the free file attributor, we can use this button at the bottom here, which is the edit file attributes button. We can click that and we can type into this box whatever field notes you want. So I'll just type something in there. So saying you can put in there location, detector types, the weather, grid references, whatever you want into this box. And to save it, we just click this box here, which is save. And as you can see, those notes now are shown on the screen here, and they're embedded within the metadata of that file. If we go back to the top then now, whenever you open a file in SonoBat, it opens in what is known as compressed view, and as you can see, compressed is highlighted here with a highlighted little green button. Now basically what that means is that any periods of silence that are in the file are effectively removed, and so it means that there is more space, for want of a better word, to actually display the calls, and it means you can display them in a lot better detail. Now if we look here at this button here, this where it says TF, which is the time of file, and it's showing 4,102 milliseconds. Now that is the length of the actual recording that we made. But if we look just above it and we look at the duration of the window, we'll see it's showing 130. So effectively we've chopped 3 seconds of silence out of this view. Now if we want to look at the full the full file, we go to this next button down, which is real time. Little green highlight comes on showing that you're in real time, and this view is probably more familiar to people who are using programs such as Batsound or Audacity. And just in the same way as those programs work, we can zoom in to a particular part of the file. If I undo that. One thing I should have said, just forgot there, was that if we look now at the window, we'll see we're now showing the full 4,100 milliseconds of the file. Now while we're in real time, we can actually invoke now another little part of the program which is quite useful, and that is if you record 2 species of bat in the same recording. So quite often you may be recording one bat and a pipistrelle will fly over the top as you're recording, so you'll get 2 species within the same file. Now what we can do in real time is that we can make a second file from the first, sort of a mother and daughter type situation here. So just for the sake of argument, we'll assume that this first part of the call is 1 species of bat, and the second part of this call is a second species. So what we can do is we can highlight our second species of bat, and then we can use this button down here which says saved zoom selection. So if I just click on that, do we want to save it? Yes, we do. So this has now created a new file. Now it's got the same file name as our original recording, but it's just got this extension at the end saying zoom. So if we go back to our compressed view now, and that is the second species, if you like, that's now got in a separate file, and that's quite useful to split your recordings up like that, particularly if you're tallying up at the end of the night how many files you've made of different species. The next thing I want to look at is this button here, which is the delete button. Now if you've got a file that you don't particularly want, or just say crickets or something like that in the file, and you just want to get rid of it, what we can do is now we can use this button here which is delete. And if I press the delete button, obviously it'll say, what do you want to do? I'll say yes, I want to, and I want to go to the next file down. So that's deleted. Now it hasn't actually erased that file. What it's done, it's created a subfolder within the directory called delete files, and it's placed that file into the deleted folder. So that means that if you did made a mistake and at a later date you wanted to retrieve that file, you can just go into the delete folder and drag it back out again. The next thing I want to look at is these 2 buttons here, and these are our audio buttons, and the first one is play real time. So if I just press this button here, what we do is we get a recording that is the same as you get with a frequency division detector, so just a series of clicks, but that's very good for looking at the rhythm of your recording. So say for example you were unsure whether a recording was a Lisla's or a Serotyne. You could listen to that rhythm, and depending on what the bat sounded like, you can start to make your decision of what the species was. The next button down is the time expanded. So this is a 10 times time expanded sound of the call. So again, it's quite nice being able to actually to listen to your calls. Things like long-eared bats, very nasally bats, start to stand out if you actually listen to your recordings. I'll just ignore this button for the moment, and I'll move it down to this one here. And now this is the intensity and threshold buttons. Now the red one on the left hand side is the intensity, and effectively that's the loudness of the call. Now what we can do is occasionally you'll get a call where the call's very loud and these colours start to detract, if you like, from the shape of the call. So what we can do is we can just turn down the intensity of the call. If I turn that right down, and the actual shape of the call then becomes a little bit more apparent. I put it back at the top, or back to the default setting. Obviously if we turn it up, that'll help you to identify any sort of faint harmonics that are present in the recording. The second button on the right hand side, this green one, is what they call the threshold button, and what this does, it effectively simulates what would happen if the bat you'd recorded there was farther away. So if I turn the threshold down, you can see that this bat call is slowly disappearing, and all we can see is, if you like, is a fragment of the call. So probably saying to yourself, well, what use is that? Well, if you've recorded a whole series of recordings one evening, and then suddenly you get a recording where you've just got this fragment of a call, what you can do is you can look at some of your better calls and use the threshold to simulate what that call would have looked like had the bat been farther away, and see how that compares with the mystery recording that you've just got. So that's the threshold and intensity. The next two ones down are the grid and the ruler. So if I just click the ruler, you'll see, unsurprisingly, it produces a ruler line across the screen, and we can move the position of that ruler using these two little keys here next to the frequency. So if I just click this, as you can see, each click it's just going up in 1 kilohertz jumps. We can also use this little triangle at the side here as a little slider bar, and we can just drag the ruler to wherever we want to position it. The next thing we can do, we can invoke a grid. So if we press the grid button, what you can see is then we've got a series of lines across the screen, each at 10 kilohertz intervals, and that's quite good if you're quickly looking through and you want to see, say, soprano pip and common pipistrelles. You can look at where the 40 kilohertz line is, you can look where the sort of 50 kilohertz line is, and you can very quickly see, just as you toggle through the files, whether or not they're sopranos or common pipistrelle. The next button down are the colour palettes. Now it's worth just saying at this point that when SonoBat first came out, it had a recording function built in to the software, and you could plug in your detector, say your D240X, plug it into the laptop, and you could make direct recordings straight into SonoBat. Now, because we were doing that in the field at night, this is where the black screen, if you like, comes from. So it's a method of not losing your night vision, but it does lead to a very nice, clean, sort of classy looking screen. But if you were doing a screenshot and you wanted to import that into a document, printing with a black background is not that good. So what we can do, if we use these color palette buttons here, if we look on the right hand side, this is our background. So at the moment the one that's highlighted is the black. If I just click the button below it, you'll see that that then comes on to a white background, and that's a lot nicer to print from. And also you can actually see these grid lines and the ruler much more clearly now. If I just switch the grid lines off, put them back on again, you can see they show up really readily there with the white screen. If I just put that now back to the black background, the set buttons on the left hand side are the colours. So this is the full colour, and if we just click the bottom button, what we do is we get a monochrome. So again, these are just little ways that you can alter the screen if you're doing screenshots or you want to use them in a presentation. So the next thing we want to do now is we want to have a look at some of our calls in more detail. So in Compress View, what we can do is we can just draw, using our cursor, a box, and it can be anywhere over part of a call. If we then go down to this button here, which is Standard View, and press that, we'll see now that we've got a high resolution call, a picture of that call in a window, and effectively this is a 10 millisecond window. So if you imagine there was a line going down there at 10 milliseconds, and this is your standard view. Now the theory behind this, if you like, is that if all your calls, you look at them in the same time frame, you quite quickly develop an appreciation of what those calls look like, and it's very easy to see whether you've got a short clutter type call or a long QCF call. If you're looking at calls with different time frames, the shape of the call can vary quite considerably, and I can show you that. So then this is a standard 10 millisecond window. This is the default, if you like. If I was to increase this same call, but I was going to show you, oops, I didn't mean to press that, it's my keyboard. If I was to show you that at say a 40 millisecond window, you can see the call is really truncated. It looks more like the call looks of shorter duration than it did previously, and that's purely just the scale you're looking at this call. Works the same in reverse. So if I go back to 10 milliseconds, if I was then to change this down to 5 milliseconds, the call goes the other way. So it looks as if it's a lot longer duration call than it actually is. So this is the theory, if you like, of the standard view, is that if you look at calls in the same time frame all the time, you'll be more readily be able to appreciate the differences in the actual calls. As I explained a little bit earlier, when we looked at the classify button, SonoBat produces these trend lines, and this is the yellow line that goes down the center of the call, and this is where all the measurements are taken. These are where the automatic measurements are taken. Now if we look in the bottom of this screen, we can see what those measurements actually are. So high frequency 73.3, low frequency 42.9, characteristic frequency 42.9, frequency of max energy is 45, and it was a 5 millisecond recording. These buttons along here, these are more relevant to my spats, and they're the slope measurements, different parts of that call and what the slope is at that particular point. Now unfortunately on this call we haven't actually recorded a harmonic, but this is your Harmonic Explorer, and by pressing that it will actually label your harmonics so you can see if they're true harmonics and they're not an alias. If we were doing a screenshot of this and we wanted to try and clean this screen up a little bit, we can press this button here, which is End Analysis button, and it just makes it cleaner if we're doing a screenshot. Now, one other thing with SonoBat that kind of sets it apart from some of the other software products was an idea Joe had many years ago, and that was to have the ability to compare the call that you had recorded against a set of reference views of known bats to try and help this process of identifying what the bat was that you'd recorded. And whilst we're in standard view, what we can do now is we can look at this button here, which is the append the reference view. Now with SonoBat UK we have quite an extensive library of reference views of all the UK species. With this free viewer, what we've done is we've just given you some of the more common species just to show you how this system works. And also with the full UK version, there's another little utility piece of software called the reference compiler, which means that you can actually make these reference views yourself. So if you get any nice known calls, you can make your own reference views. So if I select this one here, which is the common pipistrelle combined view, you'll see now it's split the screen in two. We've got our recording over here on the left, and we've got the reference views over here on the right hand side. Now this isn't one bat, this isn't a sequence from a bat. What this is the repertoire of common pipistrelle. So over on the left hand side here we've got a short clutter type call, and then as we move across, the calls get progressively longer till we end up over here on the right, which is quite an open air long QCF call, but all common pipistrelle. If we wanted to look at just an individual call in isolation, we can use these at the bottom, which are the individual calls, and if we just click on a common pipistrelle call, so this is reference call from a pip, and we can use it then to compare with the call that we've already made. And to toggle through that list, we can just use these up and down keys here. So to close this down, we'll just go to End Standard View. So after we've looked at our measurements, we've listened to the call, we've looked at the reference views, and we come to the conclusion that this is a common pipistrelle. If we wanted to, in the main UK or in the universal version of the software, we can use this button here, which is the manual ID button, and by pressing that, what we do is we get a drop down list of all the species that we're expecting to find, and we can just select one of these, and then it will put the species name into the file name. Now with the free viewer, I'm afraid we don't offer that facility, but you can still append a species to the file name by simply just going up to the file name, click at the end, and we can just type in our species, and once again we can just go to change. The next thing I want to look at over here is these buttons here, and this is the filter system. So if I go to our recordings and I look at this file here, we'll see that it's not quite as clean as the other one, and at the bottom here we've got quite a lot of low amplitude, low frequency noise. And what we can now do is we can try and clean this recording up a little bit. Now the standard default with SonoBat is there is an auto filter built in, so it'll try and pick the best filter that it thinks is best for, or should I say the minimum amount of filtering to give you the sonogram. If we click on this top button here, what it does is it gives us a lot of manual filters we can use. These top ones from 5 to 30, these filters attenuate the signal, so they reduce the loudness of the signal. These next ones, the 5 kHz to 15 kHz, they are cut off, so they effectively will cut, it says what is on the tin, it'll cut off that frequency completely. So in this particular recording, if we look, it's fairly low level and it's mainly below 30 kHz, so we can use the 30 kHz attenuating filter, and as you can see, there's all little bits of noise. But if you wanted to do a screenshot of this call, obviously it looks a lot better if you take out that low amplitude noise, and in some cases it can actually improve the quality of the sonogram of the actual call as well. Now the little sort of warning thing with this, if you've used a manual filter on a particular call, before you look at your next call, remember to turn this back to auto filter. If you don't, just for the sake of argument, if we had a 30 kHz cutoff and then the next bat that we recorded was a low amplitude noctule, it wouldn't show on the screen. So put it back to auto filter whenever you've finished using the manual filters. The final thing I just want to show you on this, if I just go back to one of our cleaner recordings, in fact let me just go down to the next one. Is this at the bottom? This is the call interval. Some people call it interpulse interval. Now, of all the things that can be measured by an automated system, this is probably one of the hardest ones to do. If you're doing this manually, you can readily see whether or not you have 2 bats in your recording. Because what the automated system will do, it'll look at the first call of bat number 1 and it'll measure it to the first call of bat number 2. So the second call of bat number 1, the interpulse interval will be wrong. So you've just got to be fairly careful, should I say, with how you interpret the intervals between the calls. Now in this call we can see that we've only got 1 bat, so these call intervals between the calls should be good. But that's just a little warning if you've got multiple bats in your recording. One other thing I can show you here is the frequency scale. Now this is a common pit. We lost some of the upper frequencies, but even with the upper frequencies, with a common pit, we're only going to get up to about 80-90 kHz. If we'd recorded something like a Beckstein's, for example, that's going up to 130 kHz, it would actually go off the top of the screen. Or if we were recording something like say a Natras bat going up to 120, any harmonics of that call wouldn't show on the screen. So what we can do, if we click on the top frequency, you'll see it invokes a little new little table, and we can increase it to whatever frequency we wanted, so say 150 kilohertz. And that's how you can alter the frequency access on the screen. So finally then, I just want to show you a couple of other things. Down at the bottom here we've got two buttons saying SonoBat and SonoVet. Now again, these are functions that are available on the full UK version, and if we click on, say, the SonoBat one, what it does is it gives you a little or a link to a PDF guide which will tell you how that button will work on the main program. And in a similar sort of vein, on the top here there's a little button that says guides, and if we click that, that gives you a lot more of these little PDF guides. So we've got one on recording, basic operations of the viewer, processing, classification, and a little bit about the origin and the history of SonoBat. So effectively that is it for the viewer. So saying this is the basis of all the versions, so SonoBat UK, SonoBat Universal, and this free viewer which is available, which just has a little less in the way of functionality included in it. So that's everything for this one. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next training guide.